Saul and David are the first kings of Israel. David lived around 1000 BC, and this time period is referred to as the United Monarchy because David unites all of Israel and he establishes the capital at Jerusalem. So he and Saul also spend a lot of time fighting smaller countries, not major empires like Egypt or Assyria, but smaller populations of Moab, Edom, Ammon, and Philistia. And these countries were also establishing themselves in the land of Canaan in the absence of Egypt and Hatti's control. And they were fighting with Israel mainly over territory. You'll notice on this map, these countries are all around Israel. They were border conflicts somewhat continuously. I usually refer to these countries as Israel's frenemies, and that's because when there were no major empires threatening their land, they would fight each other over the land. But when the major empires later rise up and pressure this area, these smaller nations would band together in alliances in order to protect themselves from the larger enemies. So during King David's day, they sort of exemplify that expression, when the cat's away, the mice will play. They're all trying to control this little slice of land. Now, during the reigns of David's son, Solomon, and his grandson, Rehoboam, however, the age of empires begins and the Bible storyline takes a turn. So at this point, Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon have rebuilt, and over time, their power reaches new heights. And the nation of Israel splits apart into two separate nations, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And these two nations are under relatively constant pressure from the empire. So we'll read about this in the book of Kings. So, first, their kings are forced to become vassals of Assyria, meaning that they pay Assyria tribute regularly as a way of saying, Assyria, we are loyal to you, we will do what you say. They remain independent nations, but Assyria is their overlord. So this is an engraving of an Assyrian relief of an Israelite king, Jehu. In the picture, Jehu is kneeling down and kissing the feet of the Assyrian officials. But a major difficulty for Israel and Judah was that sometimes it could be difficult to tell which empire to pledge their allegiance to. And the downfall of Israel and Judah is sort of a story of both nations choosing the wrong side. So in 2 Kings 17, which we'll read later in the course, we'll read about Hoshea, the king in the northern kingdom of Israel, who was paying tribute to Assyria, but then quit doing that and switched sides. So this passage reads that Hoshea, the son of Elah, began to reign in Samaria over Israel. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria found treachery in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and offered no tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded all the land and came to Samaria. So Hoshea made a bad decision here. Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC and then went on to conquer Egypt in 671. And Judah was also attacked by Assyria at this time, but King Hezekiah, king of Judah at that time, paid tribute to Assyria, and Judah was spared. But what then happens is that Babylon captured Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, in 612 BC. And at this time, Judah and Egypt tried to reassert their independence, and Judah followed a similar fate as Israel. Its king threw its hat in the ring with Egypt, and again, wrong decision because Babylon was stronger. So Babylon came and destroyed Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, in 586 BC. The Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and exiled many of the people, meaning they took many of the residents who survived the destruction with them back to Babylon. And so this event is referred to as the exile. Well, empires rise and fall, and eventually Cyrus the Great of Persia came and conquered Babylon. And he had a different policy than Babylon did when conquering lands. Instead of forcibly moving or exiling people, he would allow them to stay in their territories that he had conquered. So in 538 BC, about 50 years after the Israelites had been exiled to Babylon, Cyrus decreed that any Israelites who wanted to return to their homeland could do so. And some of them did, and some of them didn't. This period is known as the Postexilic period because it occurs after or post-exile. Books like Ezra and Nehemiah describe what happened when the Israelites returned to the land at that time. And some of the prophets like Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi preached at this time. And it's during this time period of empires, when Persia is ruling at the time, and Israel has returned to their land, and they're still under Persian rule, though. It's at this time that the Old Testament comes to an end. So during the days of Malachi, the last prophet, who probably lived in the 400s BC, the people had been restored to their land, but it seems that some of them were wondering if their God, Yahweh, was still really with them, if they were still his people, and if he still intended to restore them to a place of glory. Okay, that has been a whirlwind of a historical tour of this time period, and I want to return to my original questions at the very beginning of the Ancient Near Eastern history discussion and see if the answers have become a little clearer. So for extra points this week, find the Easter egg posted in Blackboard and answer the following 2 questions that we asked. First, why wouldn't Jonah have wanted to go to Nineveh in light of what we've learned here? And second, why would Goliath's people, the Philistines, have wanted to fight the Israelites in the first place?